All
Hi,
right.
I'm Karina. I'm from rockfreaks.net, one of Scandinavia's biggest online magazines. And look at who's here. So, Ville, I have some questions. You're on a world tour for your album that just celebrated its first birthday. Congratulations, last month. Neon Noir. And I was wondering, how was the creative process to the album compared to everything you've done before, actually?
Well, I've been left to my own devices more or less since the very beginning. You know, I was the more or less the single soul songwriter in him, my previous orchestra of the macabre, and so in that sense, not much changed besides maybe the fact I'm liking some of the camaraderie, the hanging out with the lads, you know, and the sort of jamming out ideas and you know, I grew up with the guys, so there's a big part of me being in him, and not only musical and not only creative, but just as you know, growing up to this to be this fine gentleman that I am, and yeah, working in solitude is pretty familiar, but playing all the instruments by myself wasn't, and recording wasn't. I haven't really done. I've been a hobbyist before, but then I sort of, you know, I thought that you know it's important to give yourself idiotic and over the top challenges to keep yourself on your toes and to make things as much out of the ordinary as they can be. Otherwise, there's no, you know, wonder in life, and you need some of that. So and those sort of like you know, happy and lucky accidents and coincidences, and you have to make them happen, you know. Push yourself and do something, you know, something that you're not so comfortable with, because routine is the killer of, I think, everything, life in general. So whenever you can avoid it, you know, that's it's a good idea to do so, at least in my case. But yeah, that was way. Then there was the influence of the pandemic as well, because I worked on most of it. That was the reason I couldn't get a band together. That was the reason why I've started wondering about recording stuff by myself as well. So it was a lot of things sort of happened at the same time and forced my hand, so to speak. And because of that, I'm glad, because I think I was able to sort of like pour out of myself very undiluted version of the sentimental rock and roll I'm known for. So you know, it was great to not to have to listen to anybody or play sort of like work around anybody else's calendar. So yeah.
So I read somewhere, I don't remember where, and don't hang me up on it if it's not true, that you actually play and you recorded all the instruments yourself on the album. Yeah,
I did the whole thing. I think I did everything else besides taking the photograph for the cover, and then I didn't mix or master the album. So it was mixed by Tim Palmer, a guy who worked with him several times in the past, and mastered by a guy called Justin Sturtz at Sterling Sound in Nashville. And he's worked with him since, I think, we did the DVD, the live thing, the Digital Versatile Doom, so a while ago. Anyway, I needed the support and the sort of like the oversight of people who weren't as deeply lost in the woods. Because you know, after all that time working on the music myself, I didn't have any idea whether it's decent or undecent in just the right amounts or whatever was needed. And Tim was able to sort of give me a heads up or give me an idea whether something he thought was finished and he could start mixing on. And so it was an important little team. And then Jonas Brandt is the guy who took the cover photograph. We've known each other for many years, and we was both quite desperate in the turmoil that was the pandemic. And one day we just thought that let's do a few shots, and he shot it on film, and it was kind of cool. He painted the the V's in my eyes with LEDs, and or like did this because the shutter speed was super slow, so I had to stay really still. That's probably why I look like a deer in headlights, and that's also the reason why it's not super, sharp. You can see that there's a bit of blur in the pic, but it's old school, just the way we both dug it. So, but otherwise, like I think I designed the lettering for it, the font. So the so not the handwritten stuff, but the actual letterpress. Well, I didn't. Well, I kind of designed it. I bought these kids like these ink stamp things.
Oh,
Then I scanned them. Then I messed around with them because I wanted to get the right blobs and the weird, mess up things that might happen. And I scanned them, put them into a program. There's quite several these days which I didn't know of. I had to learn how to mess about with those and get the lettering going. Because I always thought I always loved Castle and Antique, which is a letter type that the Sisters of Mercy were always using. A lot of others as well, but then in the early 80s and stuff, I always thought that just a font can be such an important part of the overall experience, because you remember like movies and some books, maybe you remember the fonts that have been used, and they sort of like become emblematic and iconic, at least in your own little world. So I wanted to give that a shot too. That was probably the reason why it took such a long time to get the album out.
but I mean, it arrived. It came when it had to. You just needed to mess around with some bits, and I think that's kind of cool. Like being so into the small details that someone's going to notice at some point. There's always going to.
Or then I have to talk about it, publicly, just to make people notice. But
I mean, some of us noticed. I did wonder how the V's in your eyes were there. I didn't know it was neon. I actually thought that it was photoshopped.
Yeah, no, it wasn't. It was like drawn. When you have that really low shutter speed, you can do that. And it was just that one shot that actually worked. And that's the cool thing about film too, because you don't know. And there's no like hundreds or thousands of pictures to choose from. You have like 40, and usually 38 are shit. So, or I was shit in them. They were technically, but yeah. And it took a while also to get the whole thing done, because a lot of people in the business didn't know what to expect from me, because they perhaps they knew of him, but that doesn't necessarily give you like a free pass, with my solo stuff. So it's the same thing with touring. So now we're flying a couple of weeks to Australia and New Zealand, and also now playing the rest of actually not the rest, but doing Scandinavia proper and Baltics and Finland in between. So it took a while to be able to convince people that that they should open their doors for me.
Yeah, which is funny because just gonna mention him quickly. It was one of the big bands for a lot of people back in the 2000s and continued to 2010s until you broke up. So I was surprised to hear that you need a bit more to convince people that you're still here. That's suck. People should know better.
Well, no, but I think I'd rather have it the other way around.
Really?
Things are. It's not. I don't think it's good to live in a world where you take things for granted. So I think it's important to prove yourself as well. So but it's taken a while, and also with the pandemic, there was the backlog of the vinyl pressing plants was like 8 months, which is a really really long time. So I wanted the vinyl to hit the stores at the same time as the digital ones and zeros versions are out. So and I didn't want to tour before the album's out. So all that took a while to sort of like be able to handle the logistics and the scheduling of everything. So, but I think that was good. It was worth the wait, at least for me. And we had the time. Also, I needed to put a band together and find a crew. So there was a lot of stuff I haven't done in 20 years or whatever. So it was a lot of good, sort of like new stuff as well. It was weird looking for band like people or whatever.
Yeah, I could imagine it's like a completely new start now, and really
Yeah,
need
and
to
kind of
do.
not at the same
Yeah.
time. That's
Yeah.
you know, to have a shit ton of experience is one
Yeah.
thing, but then others, I was just like, what do I do now? It's like, for example, like talking about finding musicians. I was like asking from my lovely manager Antti, who's been taking care of my stuff for quite some time. I was like, how do you put a band together? Like, I don't know anybody. I've met people at bars like 20 years ago, but I don't really know how this all works out and how people deal with it these days and whatnot. And so it was cool because it's quite endearing to find yourself in these places where you have sort of your beard is getting grayer, but you still feel like you're 12 because you're so out of your depth.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a good combo.
Yeah, I completely agree. So how did you end up meeting your band?
Um, well, the aforementioned Antti, he suggested that I sit down with Risto, the drummer, who became the drummer, and and we never met before, and we got along like a house on fire, as they say, and the and he had good ideas. He had ideas of different players that he'd been, you know, we were talking about what I was looking for because I was looking for something. I was hoping that the band would be somewhere in between the Queens of Stone Age and Kent. You know that, but I always loved Kent, the Swedish band. Isola was one of my favorite albums when they were on the same label as we were back in the day, and so like their album was a big hit. It had a song called "Om Du Var Här," and that got played a ton everywhere. And that was it still is an inspiration. But I was looking for something that, or in other words, I wasn't looking for a carbon copy clone of him, and I was looking for something that wouldn't be strictly metal. The guys in him, like especially Linde, he's like a metal guitar player. Of course, he can play whatever. But I was looking, as with Neon Noir as well. I can't play as well as Linde, and my influence is a bit more sort of like new wavy, more early '80s and sort of jangly guitars and sort of like that, you know, rough around the edges, beauty. So I was trying to look for a band that would be a bit different too, because that would breathe a new life to the hymn songs as well, because I knew we'd gonna play some of those too. So there's no reason to try to do exactly what I just did for the past 30 years. So.
But how was it bringing the new songs, the album to life, like playing it live the first time? Was it a bit nerve-wracking?
No, not
No?
really. We'd rehearsed it really well. It was quite nerve-wracking rehearsing and getting the sound together, because when you start, even if you have the best musicians in the world, it still takes a while for the sort of like the place, you know, the parts to fit, you know, the piece of the puzzle, whatever. So that took a while, but then you sort of like all of a sudden things click, and once you get that one click, usually there's a succession of clicks. That it's just, you know, it's like TikTok. It's just, and through that it was quite easy. We it's no. I think the nerve-wracking part is the fact that, of course, I didn't know how people would appreciate the new music since we started touring right when the album came out. So people really they heard a couple of tracks before, so or three I think, but or six, because I released that EP when the lockdown started.
Gothic.
Yeah, Gothica Fennica, the with Runaway from the Sun and Satsina and Satinalia and then Salute to Sanguine. And originally that EP was the idea that through that EP I would be able to open up the conversations with the record labels, and also to gauge the interest of the listeners. You know, if there's people who would be still, because I think that's a fair way of also sitting down with the record labels when you actually have something out and you can say that this is the kind of record I make these days, whether you're interested or not. Because I'm really bored of the sitting down at meetings and bragging about things you haven't done. You know, like being like, yeah, it's going to be the most awesome rock record ever. You know, it's going to be the thriller of goth or whatever. So it's just not my cup of tea. I'm not American enough for that. I don't have the audacious, you know, sort of self-belief and you know, delusion of grandeur, sort of, so which I adore. But I was built in a different way. So I like to do the music first and then let that do the talking, and then it's a good icebreaker and a conversation starter. So, but but nevertheless, yeah, it took a while on tour. I remember when we started, we played the first gig on the day of the release of the album. So of course people didn't know the songs, and but now, you know, now 120 shows later, they know some of it. So 32 more to go, I think. Knock on wood, and then we're done for the time being.
Yeah. And what are you gonna do then? Holiday?
No idea. I'm I usually travel for, I don't call it work. I travel for music, and so I've never really. I can take a day off, but usually it's not a day off from music. It's just, you know, still listen to some or strum the acoustic guitar or whatever. So I don't know. I think it's good to assess, you know. So like come back home, because it's been the few last years. There's been a lot of things going on, like, you know, sort of like reinvigorating, revitalizing myself, and sort of, you know, the good old Lazarus effect. So I think it's good to sort of like sit down and see what actually happened in the past 3-4 years, and see what could be done next. You know, I don't do PowerPoint presentations, don't you worry. So it's not that serious. It's more about just sitting down and sort of, you know, okay, what went right and what could we improve upon, and that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with music per se, but I love deadlines, and I love the frameworks that deadlines make you, force you into, because if you have an open world, you know, if you can do whatever whenever, it usually means that you don't do shit. That's at least how I am. So I need to force myself, and I need a reason, or I need a goal, sort of like, to kick my sonic ball into
Gear.
Yeah.
Yeah. But so, I mean, back in the hymn days, once again, you spoke about how Black Sabbath and Type O Negative were inspirations to a lot of the music. What's been the inspiration this time around? Have you found anything new, updated, that was a bit more inspiring? No?
I guess bits and bobs. I think the last band I really fell in love with was probably Interpol, and that was mid 2000s when Antics came out, and it was just happened at the right time. It was the soundtrack to my life then, and it was just an important album. But I sort of like, now I fell in love with a bit with Killing Joke again. You know, I didn't know the 80s stuff too well. I was a big fan of. They had an album called Pandemonium that was amazing in the, I think, 93 or 94 when it came out. It was a big deal. It sounded great. It sounded really different. It was just different kind of music, and so now so like I've been listening to the older Killing Joke. There's a quite poppy album called Brighter Than a Thousand Suns, and that album's beautiful. It's great. And they have such a weird, different sound to them. They're just, the way Jazz Coleman writes songs, and the way that Jody played, God rest his soul, his guitar is just it's very unique. The band sounds very unique.
Yeah.
So I've been listening to them quite a bit. Then Zetra, the London band that are on tour with us, who are going to be on tour as well. Sort of like duet or a duo of two guys wearing, like, you know, penguin black metal makeup and spikes, but yet they sound like a mixture of Cocktail Twins and Type O Negative. It's a really cool band. So it's great to have them on tour with us. So I'm listening to their stuff, but it's more or less I fall in love with the song and these days, and I've been trying to get into the playlist sort of ideology, but there's still work to be done. But yeah, of course, the typos and whatnot, they're still there, but they will never go away. But yeah, I remember during the pandemic, there was Zetra was one of the bands I fell in love with, but the other one I really enjoyed was Death Heaven released Infinite Granite, the album, which is really it's quite different from what they've done in the past. I knew of the band, I'd heard some of it, but I really thought that they did a similar thing that I'm not sure if you know the Liverpudlian band Anathema.
No.
Oh, you should check them out. They have there's an album called well, Alternative 4 is good. There's an album called well, anyway, the point being that Anathema was one of those bands that started from nearly death metal roots, and then through many different changes, they changed into this really emotional, super melancholy, romantic sort of non-metal music, but they still have that metal roots, not dissimilar to The Gathering, in a way. And Death Heaven did a similar sort of U-turn. It's way more melodic, and to me, it sounds a bit like The Killing Joke and The Smiths to a certain extent. It's just a bit weird. It has like, and which I love about music, that the combination really feels new, at least to me. It doesn't sound like anything I've heard before, which is a great thing. As a piece of music,
Yeah.
So I like their stuff. I never had the chance to see them live, but they're good. But yeah, I'm a bit slow when it comes to music, and and there's what's her name? The album's called The Greater Wings, and is it Juliet Byrne? Not quite sure. It's a very folky, very ethereal, very sort of dreamlike folk album that's very quiet, but it was one of the guys who worked with Sigur Rós was involved in that, so it has sort of like ambient vibe to it too. It's a very I love that album because I listened to a ton when flying, so it was my soundtrack for last year when on tour. Because a lot of times when you're on tour, you don't want to listen to Motorhead, because you're in a noisy environment all the time, and we get to listen to Motorhead before the gigs and Danzig's Mother and all the classics, to get us dudes pumped up. But
so you weren't listening to Taylor Swift and Miley Cyrus and to get you pumped
no,
up?
I tried to. The Cardigan song was by Taylor Swift that came out. The album that has the sort of black metal cover, the forest one. I tried to listen to it, but it's not my cup of tea. It's to me, it sounds and feels like hot chocolate. Not the. It's just it's too sweet.
You were kind of hoping that the album. Shit, I can't remember its name, was a bit more heavy in it.
Not heavy musically speaking, but she's great at what she does. But it's just, but it is like Miley Cyrus, or it is like the Olivia Rodrigo.
Yeah.
And that's pop stuff. They're fantastic at what they do. But to me, a lot of the music, maybe Billie Eilish doesn't like it. Is a unique sense of musical identity that I do think, and I'm showing my age, but the '80s had a bit more. Like with Annie Lennox and with Madonna and with Cyndi Lauper, with Kate Bush, with Debbie Harry, and now I'm just talking about females, of course, but it's just, it's just a lot of the pop, but it's probably the reason I just don't listen to it too much. Billie Eilish is you can instantly know when it's her. Same with Lana Del Rey, which is, I think is fantastic when you have a musical identity. I remember when a video game came out, that was a big deal. It's such a good song, and it happened at the right time, and it was so left field when it happened. It's amazing.
This is so left field for me. I can't believe we're talking about this. This is absolutely amazing. I mean, I completely agree. Making music that has an identity, and that's one of the things that you have been good at doing with your songwriting for decades. Honestly, if you look into your lyrics, they aren't just anything random. They seem very personal from time to time.
That's because they are very personal, but it's also, that could be interpreted as a fault as well. I was just thinking about, is like, if you think that the value of an artist is tied to the records he or she sells, then we're fucked. But I've always enjoyed artists that are a bit more idiosyncratic, like Dinosaur Jr. and Godflesh and Anathema and all sorts. So I always find myself in the same position. You can't sort of like notoriety is not necessarily the value of the artist. It doesn't matter whether it's a C cassette somewhere hidden away amongst the cobwebs and nobody's listening to. It's just that if it resonates, and I I'm not Max Martin. My manager would love it if I would, but I can't do anything about it. But be this twisted sort of Edwards the Scissorhands version of Max Martin, So.
I mean, there is at one point there'll come a solution to the twisted version of Edward Scissorhands, Ville Valo. But I mean, right now everybody's currently digging you and the solo album. I've heard it, and I've spoken to my fair share of people that have heard it, and everybody seems to agree that it was one of the best albums that came out last year. Because
then again, it's a conversation of maybe it's just me. So our last album was filled with shit albums. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's not only reasonable; it's very likely.
I mean, I could sit here and say that. I mean, you could have changed, but the fact is, I actually like the coherent. Like how the track list was put together. It was very cohesive, and it felt so it felt like everything was so natural, progressed. because
right.
Because you have to think that I used to listen to you back from 2006, maybe 5, and then all the way, still do. And it's just such a beautiful, natural progression that you've put one thing away and you've started working on this. And I remember when you did the Valo and the Agents thing, saw the videos on YouTube, but this is just so beautiful. And I do feel like, because I remember reading an interview so many years ago with you in Kerrang, or was it Rock Sound? It was one of those big magazines, and they were just like, you spoke about how H.P. Lovecraft and Edgar Allan Poe have always been such an influence in your music, and like when you read lyrics that you write, you see that you're a great storyteller, and I think so, but that's just
you're allowed to go opinion, yeah.
You're allowed to continue, but I mean, what was it that attracted you to Edgar Allan Poe and H.P. Lovecraft and all these?
Well, those are the only books we had in the library when I grew up, I guess. But it was that was the 80s. I think that at least the big deal then was waiting for somebody to get a VHS copy of a copy of a horror movie such as Hellraiser or The Evil Dead or whatever, and then we gather around somebody's house who had a VHS player to get scared together. And with that, I'm not sure actually if younger, especially boys, if they're into horror. I'm not sure if that's a thing, but it used to be a thing back in the day. We didn't have the Dungeons and Dragons. That seemed to happen a bit later, but and so I've heard. So it was a lot of horror influence stuff. I think it's a sort of like a version of bungee jumping in a way. Trying to get yourself to feel something, be on your toes a bit, and being on a roller coaster ride or whatever. And I never liked roller coaster rides, but I like getting the spooky, getting myself spooked out while listening to while not only listening to, but I remember, for example, I read The Hell House by Richard Matheson while listening to Ambient Works Part 2 by Aphex Twin, and that worked out really well. It's really freaky because the Ambient Works 2 is very sort of like meandering and very dark sounding, most of it, and so that's how it all happened. But yeah, I was sorry for the long one. Sort of like speculation, just trying to figure out where it came from. My dad bought me books from local secondhand bookstores, and for whatever reason he bought me that kind of stuff. I guess I was too young for Tolstoy, or too old for I don't know, some romantic novellas. But well, yeah. And I've been always sort of like I easily get sucked in to the world of other creatives, like the Tolkien sort of stuff, whom I wasn't a huge fan of, but you can just close your eyes and imagine, really get your imagination working. And I think I think Poe was important in that, and the sort of like had some like horror story novella, whatever, compilations and the weird stories from the 20s or whatever. And I read all that stuff. That was what I had. I still have some. My mom and dad, they're avid readers. They had a lot of books, but a very sort of different kind of stuff that I read. I'm just trying to sort of like figure out where that. I think that at the end of the day, no pun intended, comes from the heart. So I think that's just a personality trait of being a bit of a romantic and being quite whimsical and quite sort of like into the fantastical. Yeah. And by fantastical, I don't necessarily mean stuff that's not real, but seeing maybe making a mountain out of a molehill, sort of like seeing beauty in little things. And then musically, I don't think that life is ever either or. It's always a mixed bag of whatever weird feelings you might have, and then the less black and white things become, the older you get. So I love that in music too, and I love that in lyrics too, where you can be tongue in cheek, yet wear your heart on your sleeve, and at the same time be something else. You can have several different emotional states happening while a single sentence happens. And a lot of times, a lot of artists, they have a hard rocking song that talks about cars or whatever, and then a sentimental song that talks about a girlfriend or whatever. And I like to write songs that include both.
Life shit sometimes, but on the other hand,
yeah,
it gets better.
Indeed. Well, yeah. It's not necessarily about that. It's not necessarily about the journey, or it's not about solving problems. It's about
being in it.
It's sort of like keeping the embers going, of emotion and those weird states. It's not unlike emotionally witnessing something that you maybe saw in a David Lynch film. Just those crooked emotional states that they have something seemingly very normal and something seemingly very traditional, yet the subtext or the underlying feeling is something of perhaps even danger. And if you can bring that to music, then I'm happy. Or to books where they're sort of like genre hopping and you're not quite sure. But also you've got to be careful that it's not too forceful or doesn't sound too premeditated. Let's now put a cembalo happening while something's, I don't know.
I get it. And
I don't, but
no, I get what you're saying. Like it's cool to mix the different genres, but don't overcomplicate it or make it too out there.
Well, it's not cool. It's necessary, and at the end of the day, it's your personal expression, and it's a combination of everything I love in music and life and literature and films and whatnot. So it's not very well thought out, as you maybe can tell. So it's like cooking in the dark.
That can be very dangerous.
Yeah, I guess so. But that's why I turned into a vegan. Well, I'm not vegan at the end of the day. I'm a vegetarian being forever, but yeah.
Yeah, okay. Same.
Yeah, you can easily mistake a carrot for a finger or a finger for a carrot. That's what I meant by cooking in the dark.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about when you're what's it called?
I know.
Yeah.
I know. Yeah, I don't have gas anywhere, besides playing drums in my previous band. But That's the reason. I don't trust myself with fire.
Oh shit. That is one way to wait. So we can't expect live fire at Amabile at the end of April.
Like pyrotechnics. No. But it's I think what the problem with pyro is that somebody's always going to do it bigger.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like it's a never-ending story. And then at the end of the day, people's hearings get being damaged. I hate those explosions because you can't control them. Or then you're like, you know, eyebrows going to be singed. And so I don't know what the cool deal is about it. Oh, no.
It's
But
fire. It looks fun. Marshmallows.
oh man, yeah. Well, I guess so. Maybe I've just forgotten the marshmallow aspect of it. But no, we got it's a playing clubs, so it's a pretty intimate setting. I think the star of the evening is the songs, and then how they hopefully resonate and get some people smiling. You know, it's been really nice, and it's been, well, at least last year it was cool in a way that there's a lot of people who never had the chance to really see him play. They got into the game a bit later or were a bit younger, and so there's been those people that followed him since the 90s, then people who never got the chance, and then some people who don't even know who him are and just heard about my stuff. So there's like a cool
mix,
you know, cool mix of all sorts of generations, and they come from different walks of life, and I think that's healthy in essence, but it makes for an interesting evening. It always really does. So yeah,
well, I'm convinced I should come.
Well, you know, if you're around, you know, please do knock on the dressing room door, and I might even give you a free soft drink if you're really.
If I'm nice.
Yeah,
Hi, remember when we spoke about Lana Del Rey? No,
yeah.
it was truly an honor speaking to you and virtually meeting you.
Thank you.
That was cool. Mind blowing. I'm just gonna stop